psychedelics, obviously there's been a lot of hype. You've just had, Compass kind of get listed on the NASDAQ. You've got a bunch of other companies. Obviously, Jeff, you're a part of one as well. So are you, Luca. So kind of just throw it at you guys. Do you guys want to do kind of like an intro to maybe psychedelics, talk about, again, from the investment landscape, maybe even, things you look at, but also things to avoid. You talk about cannabis and some of the red flags there. There's a lot of people making the jump from cannabis to psychedelics. So, I want to kind of throw that out there, and Jeff, you can kick it off if you'd like.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. So on the psychedelic side, I mean, we announced that we got into the psychedelic space 2 years ago, basically. And, we were definitely, I think, the first company publicly traded that announced that. We've been working hard, a lot, and lengthy now for 2 years, actually touching psilocybin. So one of the first things you've got to ask yourself when all these new companies are announcing they're going public, or they've done a little reverse takeover or financing, number one, is the company actually touching psilocybin? I can tell you that about 90% of them aren't. So those that say, we're getting involved in the psilocybin space, blah, 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 read those press releases carefully. They all say pretty much the same thing. And it's all, if this should happen, or if this does happen, if it, FDA clears this, we will, apply to do the following. 9 out of 10 of them are not in there doing clinical work, actually touching it. We actually have been touching it for 2 years now. Obviously, we have all the regulatory permits here in Africa to do that. So we're doing our clinical work. That's flag, red flag number one. Are they touching it, not touching it? And, there have been, probably 9 out of 10 of these companies also seem to be, a lot of the characters that came from the cannabis space are now, leading these psychedelic companies. And I'm not quite sure with most of them what they are actually doing. I mean, I know what we're doing. We will actually, be putting out a press release. Well, by the time this gets public, it will have already come out. It'll be a great update on where we're at in terms of the 6 published papers that we've done, preclinical, now clinical, and moving into human clinical. So there'll be a great update for shareholders, for people to see what we've been up to, where we're heading, which is going to be very, very interesting. So that's kind of number 2 is, who are the people behind it? Another thing that in the industry that I just hope we don't go there, and I'm seeing a bit of it now. And in the cannabis space, there was, a cannabis company raises, $5 million, and you look at their balance sheet, and they've spent, $2.5 million on promotion. There's about 6 million, press releases every day coming out on these things, talking about a bunch of garbage. They tag this headline, that headline. They do everything. And I'm seeing that in the psychedelic space, which I just hope it doesn't continue. I hope people realize that the psychedelic space is all about, hopefully about drug discovery and about serious biotechnology, rigorous science, and about finding drugs that can truly help people to treat them with either addiction or deep depression or other areas. As an example, psilocybin can help. That's where this should all be heading. This isn't about Billy Bob and his brother tripping out on mushrooms on the weekend, which is what I see so much of. Wow, come to our retreat and try this and you'll feel fine. I'm like, who are these people? And these are the people that are giving these conferences. Hey, yeah, no, last week I was an SEO expert, and this week I'm I help psychedelic experience people, test new magic mushrooms. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're actually advocating that this is a good thing? And these are the people that you have on the panels of the psychedelic, conferences and stuff. It's like, can you please get me some doctors, some experts in science and technology, and a bunch of PhDs that actually know what's going on? Not these SEO experts or, Uber drivers during the day, and at nighttime they say they're a psychedelic expert. There's so many of these guys, and that is extremely dangerous. This is not some kind of kumbaya. This is about real science, and I hope that we don't see, a similar kind of thing like we did see in the cannabis industry, where every week there's press releases about all this garbage, all these things going on. I hope that people take it seriously, and definitely this is not recreational whatsoever. We don't do recreational marijuana, cannabis, nor do we do, we're not looking at recreational psychedelics. That's not what we're about.
I'm very excited about the psychedelics industry, just as much as about the cannabis industry. We saw the gold rush. Now I feel that we're seeing the brain rush, which is absolutely amazing. I think it's beautiful to finally get into discovering some new therapies for such critical conditions that have plagued many of our medicinal conditions over the last years, where we get to treat deep depression. With these free riders that you mentioned, Jeff, I fear that we will see them in the psychedelics industry as well as we've seen in cannabis. The snake oil salesmen and all these cowboys out there, because there is a demand for the recreational side of things, which is not what we're in for. We don't like that side. We only want to promote the medicinal stuff, but I feel we will have to deal with that once again. It's kind of part of getting the industry normalized and getting it accepted, and breaking all the stigmas there with, well, that's psychedelics, you shouldn't touch it, it's Schedule 1, which it still is, and claimed to have no medicinal benefit, which we'll see how that actually develops. And we just, as investors, we need to understand, as you mentioned, go through the rigorous process of understanding who's behind it, what's the company actually doing, and being able to pick the winners.
Jeff, question for you, and to make it a little bit more upbeat, investor-y focused, where do you think we lie on the, kind of, I guess, the life cycle of psychedelics? And by that, I mean, as a profitable investment, are we still very tip of the iceberg, early? We've seen, for example, some companies go out, do an IPO or whatever that they were worth 100 mil, now they're worth 50, or whatever combination. Are we early? Are we late? Is there a certain, type of psychedelics in terms of type of company in the industry that we should be looking at more than others? You're talking about medicinal already, but curious just from an investor standpoint, that we can name names if we want, but there's been companies that, went up to whatever 150, even $300 million valuations that are now down at half of that. Is that just the market, or is that, hey, some of that super early hype has kind of come and gone?
So we're very early, right? Very, very early in the space. It's a sector that's definitely going to continue to get hot, but the guys that aren't conducting the science, there's nothing, I hate to say it, but there's nothing behind them. So I don't quite understand. Well, I do understand. I mean, for me, it's not something as an investor, I certainly wouldn't touch them. So that's that story. Having said that, you look at the recent Compass IPO. The stock came out, it basically doubled, it's doing well, it brought some good attention to the industry. I think they got a market cap around $1.5 billion right now. That's great. It's probably justified. The stock is well placed with institutional shareholders. So, the stock's probably going to hang in there and probably do better. So that's something you could probably buy and feel good about owning at the moment. Some of the, but it actually, it checks off the boxes. Are they touching psilocybin? Check mark. Do they have great scientific teams? Check mark. How long they've been at it? Check mark. So it's not like they just came out of nowhere and said, hey, we're going to do an IPO. I mean, they got Peter Thiel, they got great backing, smart people behind them. So good for them. So early, it is early in the game, but you've got to bet on those that are actually conducting the science. And like I said, I mean, we've only had one paper that peer reviewed and now published. We've got 5 in the hopper that are out there being reviewed right now for publication. And those deal with the preclinical and clinical in vivo animal. And we do have some very groundbreaking results. I can talk about them a little bit, which are as they relate to inflammation, and in particular as it relates to blood pressure. And so these results are remarkable, to say the least. And I mean, that's the type of stuff that you want to be looking for in your, kind of investment portfolio of psychedelic stocks. Are these companies are they doing things, or are they just making press releases all the time about not much, much to do about nothing, as they say.
Let me throw this on you. You're talking about a little bit of what I want to ask anyway. You've got MindMed, Compass, obviously M2 Bio. Talk to, again, you're already saying the similarities, talk to me. There's a lot of different types. There's people trying to collect data in psychedelics. There's people trying to start media companies. There's, you've got Field Trip. These, like you said, these people traveling to whatever, take mushrooms somewhere. And then, there's the people actually doing the science. Do you want to talk about the similarities, maybe Compass has with, both MindMed, but also M2 Bio a little bit more? And, if you think that, $1.5 billion valuation is too much for you, there is other people in the industry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think $1.5 billion at this point is too much. I think Compass has got a lot to prove. They got a great team. They got great investors. There'll always be capital to back those guys in the coming years. So I'm comfortable with them. The stock price, like I said, has done well. That's fine. I think that's great, and they're actually doing clinical work. So I'm all on board with that one. No problem there. Listen, MindMed is what it is. I don't quite understand kind of their timeline since going public. There's a lot of stuff out there on them, and the reason there's so much stuff is, I mean, listen, they have spent an enormous amount of money on marketing, and I mean enormous. And sometimes I wonder, are they a marketing company, or are they actually into biotechnology? So, I mean, I say that a little bit facetiously, but it seems that, MindMed has got a press release coming out every day. And I mean, just the other day, they announced that they're, hopefully uplist to NASDAQ. But I mean, the last time I checked, you weren't allowed to say that you're hoping to get uplisted. You either are or you aren't. I mean, why say that you're hoping to get uplisted? Why not do it, get the approval, and then announce we've been accepted to trade on NASDAQ? I mean, they're going to need to do a big rollback. Like, they just went public, and now they're going to have to do a share consolidation. I don't get stuff like that. And for me, that's like a bit weird. I mean, but it seems like they're doing a lot of science with the teams in Switzerland and stuff, and hat tip to them. But I must say, I'm confused. As an investor, I don't understand in all the different directions they're going. I have looked at many of these types of organizations in the psychedelic space for a couple, years now, 2-3 years. And I'm quite familiar with what it is that everyone's doing. And that one I don't get. I'm not saying they're overvalued, undervalued, whatever it is. I'm just saying I don't understand it. And if I don't understand it, I would sit on the sideline personally. And that red flag about just the overhyped marketing machine that, comes out of them is for me, it's just far too much. I mean, you just don't need it. I mean, do the science, do the work, do it properly, and everything will work out. You don't need to make a press release every day. It's just crazy, in my opinion. So, and then some of the other ones that are out there, you mentioned there's one trying to become a media company. Listen, it is what it is. I mean, can you make a business model of being a media company in the psychedelic space? Well, we've already seen many of the cannabis media companies that also tried to go, some did go public through reverse takeovers, some tried to raise money, that failed. One just went bankrupt last week. The Cannabis, who knows what they were called, but they had that yearly big convention. They just went bankrupt the other day. You know, can you make a media company about talking about psychedelics? I don't know. Who knows? Personally, it's not for me. I think there are better things to put your money into. And then there are some out there that, claim to be in the psychedelic space because they're making mushroom coffee. I mean, we're making mushroom coffee, but at the same time, we've been working with the ARC in Africa for a year now, conducting the research into 4 medicinal mushrooms as to the why we're making the coffee and the tea and the hot chocolates that contain these medicinal mushrooms. That white paper will be published in October. We're very proud of that work that's gone into that. Dr. Ann has contributed to that paper. We have one of the leading mushroom scientists in the world that we've been working with for over a year and a half on the medicinal mushroom side, not the psilocybin side. So Dr. Susan Koch is a brilliant doctor that's world-renowned in this field. And that's our heart and soul and brains that go into the work to make these products, unlike many that say, we're launching a mushroom coffee. It's like, okay, great, but what's behind it? Like, have you studied as to the why that goes into the formulation, or, food scientists, like, what have you actually done? And very few have actually done much about it.
Do you want to name names of companies you wouldn't touch?
Listen, at the moment, Jason, I don't like to. Nobody should. None of us ever should bash other companies. That's not fair. I think that we should always give a hat tip to those that are doing the hard work. Like I said earlier, Compass has done a great job. They've got Peter Thiel and company that have done a great job at backing them, and they've got phenomenal scientists at the helm. Great on them. Hat tip to them. MindMed does seem to have a lot of great stuff going on, and the hat tip to them for all that. Some of the other kind of junior ones at the moment, I don't understand. I don't understand where they're heading, because I don't see any of them, or very, very few of them, any of them touching psilocybin. They say that they will, or they might, or they want to. I mean, okay, well, that's great, but I can assure you, you're not going to get a license for years to be able to touch it. So, if those boxes aren't being touched, again, stay away. So in terms of naming, I only touched on the two there. The two big ones at the moment would be MindMed and Compass, and the other junior ones, maybe we could get into in a week or two after I do a little bit more due diligence on those, Jason. And it wouldn't be, of course, to bash them. I would try and find some of these junior ones that actually do have some good potential, that are actually working on science. So I'll make. Do you want to talk about one,
maybe? It's getting a lot of chat about shroom. These guys have been halted for 3 months. A lot of people are sitting in there. What's happening? Curious, what do you think's happening? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I had my thoughts early on when it was first halted, and that was, this wasn't going to be halted for a week. It was going to be halted for a long time. And the reason is that they're trying to prevent what will happen in the cannabis industry with the RTOs and, the excessive valuations, with a bunch of insiders issuing themselves a ton of paper and then going out and selling paper to the public. So that's the reason it's halted. They want to make sure that, the assets that are being bought, there were some pictures of the supposed locations that were being bought for shroom, and, some of them looked apparently like TV stores, or, it was like, what is that? So that did happen in the cannabis industry. Again, not to name any names, and I won't in this particular case, but there were certain islands in the Caribbean where, some companies said, yeah, here's the big location that we bought. It's not too hard to use technology, Google Maps, et cetera, to look at a location and see that, that location either didn't exist, or that location was like a hotel in some island. It's like, they want to make sure that that same thing isn't happening in the psychedelic space. That's a good thing. I know it sucks for the shareholders. That's a bad thing. So those things, it's, I kind of hope that there's a lot of that goes on. I hope that the investors are protected. And I hope that a lot of these kind of like the old cannabis companies that were popping up each and every day, I don't want to see that in the psychedelic space.
Right.
I just saw one. Sorry, Luca, but I just saw one the other day pop up that they raised $2-3 million or something, and I quite frankly I don't understand it. I don't know what they do. I don't quite see how management has any experience in this field. So kind of behooves me as to why an investment firm would actually, a registered investment firm would raise money for them. I don't get it.
That's very interesting. For the investor's point of view, I would just like to clarify the structural difference between the contrast of the cannabis industry and now the psychedelics, and what kind of nature they actually have, where psychedelics is much more similar to biotechnology and drug discovery, while cannabis was more of a consumer product that popped up along the way. So two very different industries with their very different behavior. As an investor, you need to understand that in psychedelics, it's definitely the long term that you need to focus on. There's a lot of risk in drug discovery. Either it goes very well or it doesn't go at all. While cannabis and consumer brands, you do have some cash generating revenues through the brands and so on, which is very important for investors to understand heading into this new brain rush that we see. So definitely something to keep an eye on and structured.
No, I think, again, we covered both these industries extremely well. Good intro. We'll definitely dive into actual companies, in the future, go over, current news, walk through some stuff. Again, interesting, your cannabis thoughts, Jeff. I think a lot of people feel the same way, sit on the sidelines, see what happens. And there's some consolidation happening for sure. Anything you guys wanted to kind of sum everything up with before we close off?
Actually, interesting you mentioned there was one more thing I'd love to add to the cannabis industry. And Luca talked about it, how it's become a commodity. And everyone, has been speaking about that for a couple of years. It was something that I spoke of for a long time. And the reason I never wanted to invest in or, develop a company that would be a grower of cannabis, prior to this last year, because the economics just never made sense. Never, ever. The geography never, ever made sense where people were getting involved. And now that I've looked at Lesotho, done all the due diligence and brought aboard the best operator in my mind that one could find in Africa, period. Willem is well known as the grandfather of cannabis of Africa. Not only, globally, everybody knows him. He's the number one guy to have operationally, and that's why, again, he's become the COO of Wuhan. And for me, when I look at the costs of operation here in Lesotho versus what it is the rest of the world, it's just an absolute no-brainer that when we go to finance M2 Bio and get the necessary capital to put the property into production, which is very small. It's about $5 million to put it all into production. When we get that done, we're not going to be issuing stock and doing equity dilution whatsoever. It is a natural no-brainer to issue a bond and be able to pay funds in Africa a fantastic return on their money. Why? Because our margins are huge. So it allows us to raise capital through a different instrument, and that's the way this industry, in our mind, should be financed. That is the way we will finance it. It is much different than, of course, how North America financed it by just issuing stock all over the place. So that's an interesting thing to think about. We'll delve into that deeper in the coming, talks that we have. Because by that time we'll probably be able to announce something from our company's perspective on how we're financing the property in Lesotho. But in general, cannabis, it's not going away, Jason. It's a sector it went through its peak, went through the valley. It's getting cleaned up now, and it will reemerge as a great sector. Luca said earlier that it's all about the brands. I agree, but it's also about someone's got to produce in our case, the medicinal cannabis. It's got to be produced and made profitably. You need to know what kind of strains you're producing. So those are the things that we're doing. And in the psychedelic space, to sum up, yes, there are a ton of companies that are coming out left and right. The majority, won't make it. They won't be winners. They're just kind of riding the wave. But the bigger guys that are out there now, the ones that I did mention, the MindMed and the Compass, at the moment, Compass is doing great things, no doubt about it. MindMed, I've got to do a bit more work on that one myself, but it would appear they're doing some great stuff. I'm just a little bit confused as to what it is they're doing. And then some of the other juniors, maybe there are a couple in there that are doing some interesting things as well. I've got to look into those a bit deeper. But the majority, down the rest of them, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.